It was in the silence that she first noticed the absence. Not the kind of silence that soothes a weary soul, nor the gentle quiet of early dawns filled with promise. No, this silence was weighty, hollow, like standing in a cathedral long abandoned. It echoed with memories, not music. Her prayers seemed to vanish into the air, unanswered, unheard. For the first time in her life, Anna wondered if anyone was truly listening. She had always believed in God, not with the flamboyant fervor of those who waved their hands in worship on Sunday mornings, but with a steady, unshakable trust born from childhood stories and whispered prayers before bed. Her faith was simple, almost innocent, a quiet river running through her life. But rivers, too, can run dry. It began when her mother fell ill, a sudden, unexpected collapse, then a diagnosis that stole the breath from her lungs. Stage 4. The kind of words that don't just threaten life, they crush it. Anna prayed harder than she ever had. With tears, with fasting, with scripture on her lips. She asked, pleaded, begged for a miracle. And when none came, she waited, believing, hoping. But healing didn't come. Her mother faded like autumn leaves in slow motion. Then came the silence. She didn't lose faith overnight. Faith doesn't vanish in a single thunderclap. It drips away, slowly, like water leaking from a cracked jar. A day came when Anna no longer felt anything during prayer, no comfort, no presence, only obligation, and, eventually, even that was too much. Where was God in the dark? Why does he hide when we need him the most? And how does one keep believing when everything inside is breaking? This story is not about miracles that arrive in the final hour. It is not a tale wrapped in predictable resolutions or easy theology. This is a journey into the unseen, into the shadows where God seems absent, what is closer than we dare imagine. It is about a woman who learned to walk not by sight, but by faith in the dark. The morning her mother died, the sky was a bruised gray, like it had suffered loss. Rain drizzled lightly, tapping the hospital windows with an eerie rhythm. The world outside looked indifferent. Cars still rushed by. Nurses still moved with purpose. Machines still beeped with mechanical life. But for Anna, time had splintered into a before and after. She had held her mother's hand as the final breath escaped her lips, as the once strong fingers that braided her hair and wiped her tears lay limp in hers. There was no thunder, no angelic chorus, no sacred warmth to signal a soul rising, just silence. The same kind that had haunted her prayers for weeks now. They had called it peaceful. That was the word everyone used. She went peacefully. Anna hated that word. Peaceful implied surrender, acceptance, a gentle letting go. But nothing about this felt gentle. It felt stolen, it felt cold, and it left a void deeper than grief. It carved out her sense of divine justice. The funeral was a blur. People came, dressed in solemn black, offering flowers and whispered condolences. Their words blended into noise, like static on a broken radio. Anna stood like stone, clutching the edge of her mother's photograph. The smile in the picture was wide and warm, full of life. How cruel that time could freeze joy, how reality tore it away. After the service, Anna returned to her apartment, alone. Her Bible lay untouched on the bedside table, where it had been for weeks. The pages, once comforting, now felt heavy with questions. She no longer opened it. Not because she didn't believe, but because she feared what she might not find. That night, Sleep evaded her. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering her mother's voice reading Psalms beside her as a child. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, the words echoed faintly, but now felt like poetry from another world, beautiful, distant, and empty. She rose in the darkness and wandered into the small kitchen. The moonlight slipped through the blinds in narrow bands. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing did. She poured herself a glass of water, but left it untouched on the counter. Something in her chest ached, not just from grief, but from the absence of comfort. She used to feel God in worship and nature, even in terrors. But now her soul felt like an abandoned church, hollow and silent. Was this what it meant to lose faith? Or worse, was this what it meant to still believe, but feel nothing? She wrapped herself in a blanket and sat on the couch, staring into the dark, the air thick with a spiritual weight she couldn't name. God, she whispered, not even sure why she said it. It wasn't a prayer, more like a memory of prayer, a habit echoing in the ruins. No answer came. And yet she stayed there, waiting, listening, not for words or signs, but perhaps for the whisper of something real. That night, in that fragile space between pain and surrender, Anna made a choice. Not a loud, triumphant declaration, not a fire-filled rededication, just a fragile, quiet decision. She would not walk away. She didn't know how to trust God in the dark, but she would stay, even if it meant sitting in silence, even if faith now meant believing in what she could not feel, even if love meant holding on when it felt like letting go. In the weeks that followed, Anna drifted through life like a ghost in her own body. Mornings came not as beginnings, but as reminders that the night hadn't stolen her away. She rose, dressed, answered emails, and showed up to work, but her soul remained elsewhere, lingering somewhere in that hospital room. In that moment her mother's eyes had closed for the last time. Her co-workers offered space, which she appreciated more than words. Grief, she found, was not something people wanted to be near for long. It made them uncomfortable, exposed their own fears. So they sent flowers, kind notes, and then quietly resumed their lives, as though mourning were a brief storm that would soon pass. But for Anna, it didn't pass, it settled. Not like a storm, but like fog dense, slow, ever-present. She went to church once during that time, just once. Slipped in through the back door, sat in the last pew, and left before the final song had ended. She didn't sing, she couldn't. The words of praise felt foreign, like language from a world she no longer belonged to. The pastor spoke of God's goodness, but his voice was distant, like listening through a thick pane of glass. As she walked out under the weight of stained glass windows and soft organ music, Anna whispered to herself, I want to believe again. I just don't know how. That evening, back home, she stared at her Bible again. It remained unopened. The leather cover had gathered a thin coat of dust. She reached for it, hesitated, then pulled her hand away. She wasn't ready for scripture. Not yet. But she did pick up the notebook beside it, a journal her mother had gifted her years ago, filled with blank pages meant for prayers, thoughts, and reflections. She hadn't touched it in over a year. Now, as the house sat in silence, and opened to the first page and began to write. It wasn't a prayer, it was a question. God, do you still see me? She didn't expect an answer, but somehow writing the question felt like stepping toward something, toward the God she once knew, or perhaps toward a new understanding of him. She continued writing, one page at a time, never pretending, never polishing her words. She wrote about her anger, her loneliness, her guilt for feeling distant, her ache to feel something again. One night, as the candle beside her flickered low, she wrote, "I don't know if I believe like I used to, but I miss you." That must mean something, and maybe it did. Maybe longing is a kind of belief. Maybe the absence we feel is not evidence that God is gone, but that we once knew him deeply enough to notice the distance. Perhaps faith is not always the roar of certainty, but the quiet breath that says, "Stay." Anna began walking in the evenings, the cool air, the rustling trees, the empty sidewalks, they all became her sanctuary. She didn't speak aloud, but her heart started whispering again, not with declarations, but with fragile honesty. "Help me, show me. I'm still here." And then, one evening, it happened. It wasn't dramatic. No lightning, no booming voice. Just a moment barely noticeable. She was sitting on a park bench as the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of lavender and gold. A breeze moved through the trees, and something inside her shifted. For the first time in weeks, she felt warmth, not physical, but soul deep. A quiet, unexplainable peace settled over her. It wasn't the return of full faith, but it was a flicker beneath the ashes. And Anna did not ignore it. She didn't analyze it. She simply sat in it, eyes closed, heart open, letting it be what it was, small, quiet, but real. Maybe, she thought, that's how faith returns, not in a rush, but in a whisper, not as a flood, but as a single drop, not in the light, but in the dark where it matters most. The flicker didn't become a flame overnight. In truth, there were days when it nearly went out. Anna still faced mornings that felt heavy and nights that felt hollow. But something was different now. She had stopped expecting to feel whole all at once. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had softened around the edges. She had accepted that grief, like faith, was not linear. She began to read again, not theology, not sermons, but the Psalms. Not out loud, not even as prayer, but as witness. The rawness of David's words met her in her own ache. She found herself underlining verses not for their promises, but for their honesty. "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning?" She realized then that her questions were not rebellion, they were invitation. In the cries of the psalmist, she saw herself. These were people who knew the same God she sought and still dared to ask where he was. They too had felt silence, had trembled in the dark, had held faith like a thread stretched thin, and still they prayed, still they believed. One night, while sitting at her window watching the stars, and a whisper, "Are you still there?" It wasn't a demand, it was a reaching, and for the first time, she didn't feel foolish for asking. She felt brave. That same week, she was invited to join a small group by a colleague, nothing formal, just a few women gathering for tea and conversation about life and faith. Anna hesitated. The thought of sitting in a circle and opening up felt overwhelming, but something stirred within her, a quiet nudge she couldn't ignore. So she went. The first meeting was awkward. She said little, mostly listened, but their honesty surprised her. One woman shared about her battle with anxiety and how God felt distant in the midst of it. Another spoke about losing her job and questioning her purpose. No one offered perfect answers. No one masked their struggles, and in their openness, Anna saw something sacred: faith not as certainty, but as presence, not as knowing, but as staying. By the third meeting, Hannah shared her story, her mother's death, the silence that followed, the flicker in the park. She cried when she spoke, but no one rushed to fix her. They simply sat with her, nodded, and listened. After the meeting, one woman, a widow named Miriam, took Anna's hand and said softly, "God is still speaking, even when we can't hear him. Sometimes the silence isn't absence. It's waiting, and waiting takes faith." That night, Anna walked home slowly, letting the words settle into her bones. The silence she had feared was beginning to sound different, not empty, not cruel, but deep, like the pause before a song, the space between breaths. Could it be that God was not far, but near in a way she had never noticed before? The next morning, she lit a candle, opened her journal, and wrote, "I still don't understand this silence, but I'm no longer afraid of it, because maybe you are here. In the quiet, in the waiting, in me." She paused. For a moment, the air felt still, holy. Then came the whisper, not with words, but with presence, gentle, real, not a voice in her ears, but something in her spirit, like a hand on her shoulder, like light beneath a door. It wasn't an answer, but it was enough. Spring arrived quietly, brushing the trees with soft green and filling the air with the scent of new beginnings. Anna hadn't noticed the changing of seasons in a long time. But now, as she walked through the park one early morning, she saw buds on branches, heard birds singing in rhythms she had once forgotten, and felt the warmth of sunlight on her skin like an old friend returning after a long journey. It wasn't that the pain was gone, it lingered, like the faint scent of perfume after someone has left a room, but it no longer governed her every thought. Grief had settled into a quieter corner of her heart, no longer shouting, only whispering. Her faith, too, had changed. It was no longer the bright, eager belief of her childhood, the kind that expected swift answers and clear signs. It had grown slower, deeper, like roots finding water in hidden places. It was a faith no longer driven by emotion or certainty, but by something truer, surrender. One Sunday, she returned to church not just to sit in the back, but to worship. She didn't sing loudly. Her voice was still tentative, but the words of the song found a place in her soul. "When I cannot feel you, I still choose to trust you." And in that moment, Anna realized this was faith, not the soaring joy she had once mistaken for belief, but the quiet choosing to stay, even when God seemed silent, especially when he seemed silent. She met Miriam for coffee that week, and they talked about the strange beauty of walking with God in the dark. Miriam smiled and said something that stayed with Anna for days. "The strongest trees don't grow where the sun shines all day. They grow where the winds blow hardest and the roots go deep. Your faith is becoming like that, hidden but uncheckable." Anna nodded, tears in her eyes, not from sadness, but from resonance. She wasn't healed in the way she once hoped. Her mother was still gone. The questions still lingered, but she had found something else, something her old self had never known, a faith that didn't require sight. One afternoon, she visited her mother's grave for the first time in months. She brought a small bouquet of wildflowers and sat on the grass beside the headstone. The air was calm. She didn't cry. She didn't talk. She simply sat, and for the first time the silence didn't feel like abandonment. She whispered into the wind, "I miss you, but I'm okay now." And somehow she believed her mother heard her. As the wind brushed her cheek, Anna closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She didn't need a sign. She didn't need a miracle. She had what she needed: God's quiet presence within her, no longer outside searching for him in the noise. She had learned to find him in the stillness, in grief, in waiting, in the dark, because even in the absence of light, faith had taught her something profound. God had never left. He had been there all along. Not in the thunder, not always in the fire, but in the gentle whisper that followed. And she had finally learned to hear it. Life didn't suddenly become easy after Anna's quiet return to faith. Bills still came, work was still stressful. The ache of her mother's absence never fully left. But there was a shift in how she moved through it all. Where she once walked in confusion and anger, she now walked with a kind of reverent awareness and understanding that the path may stay unclear, yet still be guided. She had stopped expecting clarity and instead began practicing trust. One morning, as she sat in her favorite cafe journaling before work, a young woman approached her table timidly. "Excuse me," she said. "I've seen you here a few times, and I hope this isn't too strange, but you always look so peaceful, like you're carrying something quiet and good. I guess I just wanted to ask how." Anna blinked, surprised. No one had ever said something like that to her. For a moment, she almost laughed peaceful, but instead of deflecting, she closed her notebook and smiled gently. "I lost my mom," she said, "and I went through a long season where I couldn't feel God anymore. I used to think faith meant always feeling his presence, always understanding what he was doing. But now I know sometimes faith just means not walking away, even when the path disappears beneath your feet." The girl nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "I think I needed to hear that." Anna invited her to sit, and they talked for an hour. It wasn't a deep theological conversation, just two people exchanging stories of brokenness and slow healing. And as they parted, Anna felt a quiet assurance in her chest, the kind that comes not from knowing all the answers, but from knowing you're being used, even in your weakness. Later that night, Anna walked along the river. The city lights shimmered across the water, and the sky above was painted in stars. She remembered a time not so long ago when she had stared at the same sky and asked God, "Where are you?" Now, as she looked up, she whispered, "I still don't always know where you are, but I believe you see me." And that belief, once fragile and barely breathing, now stood firm in her. Not because everything had worked out, but because she had stopped requiring it to. Faith had become less about what God did and more about who God was. She began volunteering at a grief support group, not to offer answers, but to sit with others in the same sacred silence she had learned to respect. She became a quiet presence, a hand to hold, a listening ear, and over time, others began to recognize the strength she carried, not loud, not flashy, but steady, deep. One day, Miriam gave her a gift, a small frame print that read, "Faith is not the absence of darkness, but the courage to walk through with your eyes closed and your heart open." Anna hung it above her desk, because now, when people asked her about faith, she didn't describe it in terms of miracles or mountaintop moments. She told them about the silent nights, the empty prayers, the way God met her in nothing and slowly became her everything. She told them about roots that grow deep in dry soil, about candles that flicker but never go out, about the God who doesn't always speak loudly, but who never leaves. She told them that faith isn't about seeing. It's about walking anyway. Years passed. The raw pain of loss faded into something gentler, never forgotten, but transformed. Anna still missed her mother, especially in quiet moments. The first snowfall of winter, the smell of cinnamon bread in the oven, the soft hymns on Sunday mornings. But grief had become a thread woven into the fabric of her life, not a weight she carried separately. It no longer pulled her down, it deepened her. Faith had become like breath, quiet and seen, but essential. There were still days when God felt distant, days when prayers felt like echoes in an empty room. But Anna no longer panicked in the silence. She had come to understand that silence was not abandonment. It was space, space where trust grows, space where love deepens without the need for constant proof. She remembered the words she had written in her journal long ago. God, do you still see me? And now, without needing thunder or visions, she could finally answer that question with peace in her heart. Yes, he always did. Not because she saw him, but because she had learned to walk with him in the dark. Because sometimes the greatest evidence of his presence is not what changes around us, but what awakens within us. Hannah continued to live her quiet, beautiful life. She worked, she served, she prayed, and in all of it, she carried something unshakable, not the certainty of understanding, but the courage of trust. She no longer waited for the light to move forward. She had learned to walk by faith, not by sight. And that, she now knew, was the greater miracle, because when the lights go out and the path disappears, when your soul is tired and God is silent, that is when true faith begins. Not in what you can see, not in what you can hold, but in the God who walks beside you, even when all you can do is believe.